So if I were to ask you, who's that one person from your school experience that really made a difference in your life, that really made you the person that you are today, who would you say? I think most people would probably say a teacher. Maybe a 10th standard physics teacher that was really tough, or a fun 4th standard teacher, or maybe you had a tutor that gave you a lot of one-on-one support. If you were lucky enough in your school to have extracurricular activities, maybe you would say someone from there, a sports coach or an arts teacher. But for most people, I think one person that's not at the top of that list is your school principal. I think for most of us, the school principal is a little bit like that monster that's under the bed. We're not really sure if they're there, but we are sure that if they are there, we don't want to see them. Even for me, when I think back to my schooling experience, I very distinctly remember each of my teachers from standards 1 to 12. But in trying to get ready for this talk, I was trying to think back to my principals, and I didn't really remember anything about them. And I felt really bad. I was like, there has to be some interaction I had with the principal, or some conversation, or some motivating thing that they told me. And the only thing I could remember, I was in the 3rd standard, and I was playing basketball with a friend, and we got into an argument, we got into a fight, and so they sent us to the principal's office. And we had to wait there what felt like 2 hours. It was probably only 2 minutes. And the principal came, and he said something and he left. And I was thinking, what did he say? And I still, to this day, can't remember what he said. All I remember is sitting in his office and thinking, wow, his office is really nice. And I was also thinking, wow, if he calls my parents, I'm going to be in really big trouble. But that's it. But now today, after spending some time in the field of education, I actually believe that these principles of mine, even though I don't really remember who they are, they've gone a long way in shaping who I am today. And I also believe that in India, our education system, it's stuck. And it's stuck because we're not investing in our school leaders. And so today I want to talk to you about why I believe that our school principals, if we invest in them, they can be the key to help us move forward. So before I moved to India, I was working at Harvard at a research lab there run by economist Roland Fryer. And one of the questions we were trying to answer is what makes an excellent school? Right? And so answering this question is not as straightforward as you might think, because schools are a little bit like biryani. Okay? You can recognize a good one when you come across it, but it's hard to say what are those different ingredients that are going in to make it so good. Right? And so to try to unpick this question, we studied schools in New York City. Right? And we collected so much data from all of these schools. We went to the district and got administrative data from them. We went to the schools and videotaped the classrooms. We interviewed the principal, interviewed the teachers, interviewed the students. We got sample lesson plans, sample homework assignments. We got their admissions data. We got their student test score data. All of this to understand what is going on in the school. And what we ended up doing is we matched information about the practices in each of the schools with how effective the individual schools were at improving student learning. All of this to understand what makes an excellent school. Okay, so what do we find? What makes an excellent school? We found that there are 5 practices in our huge data set that explains 50% of the difference in student learning. Okay, so I see some people nodding their heads. I see some people shaking their heads. I think for some people that feels like a lot. For other people, that feels like not so much. I guess it depends, are you a glass half full or a glass half empty person? But like my old boss used to say, you know, 50%, if you would explain 50% of the variation in the stock market, you would have so much money, you wouldn't know what to do with it. Okay? And so before we get into what can explain the difference, what are the things that don't explain the differences between schools? Okay? And these are the things that we initially think of when we think of school practices and school policies. Okay? It's things like class size, spending, teacher qualifications. So then what are the things that explain why some schools are able to raise student achievement and other schools are not? What are these 5 things? The first one is human capital. Okay, so this is the principals, how much effort they put into developing their teachers. And specifically, we looked at how often the principal goes into the classrooms to observe the teachers and to give them feedback on their practice. The second one was data. How frequently schools collect data and how many decisions they're able to base on this data. The third one, time. So the good schools, the effective schools, they tried to really maximize their time with the students. In fact, many of them tried to even extend their time with the students. So they were not just happy with the status quo school day, this 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. that is in many of our schools. They did away with that. Fourth is differentiation. So what this means is the effective schools were able to get students in small groups so that school students can get taught at their individual learning levels. Okay, and then lastly, there was expectations. So simply put, the effective schools had bigger dreams for their students. Okay, so what makes an excellent school? What makes an excellent school are not the policy things that we think about when we think about education. What makes an excellent school is the inner workings of the school and how the school is being led and managed. And this is going to sound really obvious, probably too obvious for a TED Talk, but it has to do with how much the leadership can really manage the practices that impact student learning. Okay, so school management matters, but does it matter in India? Right? Ever since I moved back to India, one phrase that I've heard a lot of is, "This is India." Right? Anytime something goes unexpectedly right or unexpectedly wrong, this is India. Like when you're locked out of your apartment because the monsoon has jammed your lock, then the locksmith comes and he can't fix your lock, but he's willing to risk his life, jump over a ledge just to make sure you get into your apartment, which has obviously really happened to me. This is India, right? This is India, and India is just different. So your school management might matter in New York City, but does it matter here? And the best work that I've seen on this, it's done by Nick Bloom at Stanford University and his colleagues. And what they did is they studied the impact of school management in 8 different countries around the world, including India. And what they found is that the schools with better management practices also had better outcomes for students in every single country that they studied. And not only that, but this impact and this relationship was potentially stronger in India versus the US. So that might seem very counterintuitive, but this is India. And so based on this, right, when you look at the situation in India today, it's probably obvious that we really need leadership in many different venues, right? And it's probably very obvious to you that leadership is important. So when I said this, my whole 10-minute spiel I could have cut out. I could have just said leadership's important and you all would have agreed. Right? You think about the effort that we put in to select and train our leaders in other fields, right? In the political sphere, all the hoopla we go through to select our leaders, right? You have rickshaws blaring ads through the streets. You have pictures of politicians on every billboard everywhere. You have those TV shows with the 6 kind of commentators yelling at you all at the same time, right? All of that for weeks up to the polls, right? In the corporate world, so much effort and money to make sure that our directors are properly trained and ready for their jobs, right? Many companies have separate tracks for up-and-coming managers. Many countries will even send their employees abroad to business school. But in India, we don't give school leadership the consideration it deserves. First, the leaders in our schools are selected almost exclusively based on seniority. So what that means is once you've served a certain number of years as a teacher, you automatically can qualify to become a school leader. Second, once you become the principal, you have very few avenues for support or training. In almost all of the schools I've been in today, when I talk to the leader and I say, what training have you had for their job? They say they've had 0 days of leadership training, either in preparation for their job or afterwards. And this doesn't really make sense because the job of the principal is not only very, very important, but it's also very, very difficult. Right? Our principals, for the most part in their working careers, they've been teachers. And then all of a sudden, they get thrust into a role that's very different from what they were doing before. If you ever have the time, I think one thing you should do is you should go to a principal's office and sit there for a day and see the different people that they have to interact with and see the different decisions they have to make. Right? It's going to be things like negotiating with contractors, dealing with upset parents, responding to government officials that ask you for stacks of paperwork. It's going to be interviewing someone for a position, managing politics within the teachers, or then disciplining the naughty students like I was in 3rd grade. Right? And so all of this stuff is happening And where's the support for our leaders? So to address this, a few people came together and started the organization that I now lead, which is called the India School Leadership Institute. And what we do is we pick and we work with existing school leaders for 2 years, and we meet them regularly, and we work on these effective management practices to shift their roles from solely administrative to be leaders of learning in their schools. So today I want to tell you the story of one of these leaders. I'll call her Anita. She's the leader of a government school in Andhra Pradesh. And I remember meeting her at one of our recruitment and selection events. And she kind of walked in through the back. She came in quietly. You know, she kind of said the interviews she needed to say, and then she walked out. And I remember when I noticed that she was walking out, she had left with her husband. And only then I realized that her husband was actually there the whole time. So he came with her, he stayed the 4 hours, and he left with her. And I asked her about that, and she said, you know, I didn't really feel comfortable coming to this event by myself. I didn't feel comfortable staying by myself, so I brought my husband. And so in my head, I was thinking, this is not the picture of the empowered leader that I was envisioning. But I was very wrong. Right? Anita, when she first joined, she talked a lot about problems. And a lot of her problems were legitimate because the operation that she runs at her school is very complex. She's running a government school in Andhra Pradesh that's residential. So the students are living there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they're targeting dropout girl students from very disadvantaged backgrounds. And Anita has to single-handedly manage a staff of 23 employees. So this is not like the corporate world where she has sub-managers. These are 23 direct reports, all to serve the 600 girl students that she has. Okay, so in the beginning, she would say things like, you know, the parents of the students of my school, they're either too uneducated or too busy to really support us. Or she would say, the teachers, they don't listen to me, and there's nothing I can do. And this phrase, there's nothing I can do, this is a phrase that we hear a lot from the leaders initially. The leaders feel stuck. But what we do in our program is we try to push this back onto the leaders. We say, yes, we know you are in very challenging circumstances, but what can you do to improve your schools for your students? And not what can you do to do your administrative work, not what can you do to keep your schools going, but what can you do so that your students learn more today than they did yesterday? Right? So Anita joined our program. She joined with another group of leaders, and they became this very kind of solid cohort that learned so much from each other. They learned about these management practices. They visited schools where some of these practices were happening, and then they took all of this back to their schools. And so with Anita, over time, problems became all about potential solutions. So she would say things like, I really want to think about how can I give the parents of my students the opportunity to see how much their students are learning. Or the teachers, I know all of them are not bought in, but a few of them are. And how can I work with these teachers to eventually get to the rest? And in Anita's school, she's made tremendous progress in just 1 year. More students have passed the board exam than ever before. But I think a better indicator of quality is how the teachers of her school feel much more supported by their leader, and how the students are asking and answering the how and why questions, and how the parents feel much more satisfied with the education their students are getting. Okay? So I don't want to stand here and tell you that us training our school leaders is going to be a magic bullet solution where all of the education problems will then be solved. Okay? That'll be too easy. But what I do know is that when we train our leaders, they stop feeling stuck. Okay, so I want to show you some data that proves to me that this happens. What we do in our program is we have external evaluation partners go in and evaluate the school on 162 management practices. Okay? And they do this at the beginning of the program, and they do this 12 months later. And so I've collapsed all these 162 into one data point. And what you'll see is that over time, slowly but steadily, the schools are improving how they're being managed. But this is not the most interesting part of the data collection exercise. What is more interesting is these experts, when they go into the schools, they also have the leaders rate themselves and their own schools on these same 162 points. And so what you'll see is that the leaders, even though their schools, the blue line, the dark blue line will show you that the schools are improving, the light blue line will show you that the leaders are actually rating themselves lower than they did before. And so when we saw this, we were perplexed. Why would our school leaders rate themselves lower than they did before when experts are telling them that their school is getting better? It didn't make any sense. So we asked them. And what they said is, before, we thought we were doing everything we could. We thought we were doing a good job, so we rated ourselves highly. They felt stuck. But afterwards, after they got some management training that was very relevant and very practical to their day-to-day jobs, they felt like there was so much they could do to improve their schools, to make them really, really excellent. And so if we want to also get our education system unstuck, if we want to improve our education system and move it forward, one place that we must begin investing is in our school leaders. Because even though we don't remember who they are, they have a huge impact over who we become. Thank you.